Today on The Nation, we speak about drafting Malaysia's sexual harassment bill. Now this, as has been announced in recent days by Deputy Prime Minister Dr. Wan Azizah, will also be an instrumental manner in which Malaysian women can be encouraged to rejoin the workforce. Malaysia currently stands with one of the lowest women's labour force participation rates in all of ASEAN at only 55.8%. All of that and more on The Nation here today. So, today basically we have a panel made up of LILIAN, who's a program officer with All Women's Action Society, AWAM, joined by CHUNG, who is the advocacy manager with Women's Aid Organization in Malaysia, and also EMELLIA SHARIFF with Young Women Making Change. So, welcome to studio, all of you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank
Good afternoon. Thank you.
All right, so we've got plenty to get through actually, but I would like to start off first and foremost with, let's get into the definition of what actually constitutes sexual harassment. LILIAN.
Okay, so sexual harassment is defined as an unwanted action of a sexual nature, unwanted sexual conduct, which can humiliate, threaten, and degrade the victim itself.
So when it comes to sexual harassment, though, I would say in recent years, particularly after the watershed movement in November 2017, when Me Too, the hashtag, became a globally trending item, altogether with the Harvey Weinstein case that is currently coming to its closure in the US. But would you say there is much more cognizance on the ground in Malaysia, Renchung, with regards to sexual harassment?
Yeah, I think there's always been it's always been happening. This is not a new issue that's suddenly cropping up. I think the difference is that, number one, people are talking about it. As you mentioned, Me Too is a global movement, and it is happening in Malaysia. And you can think of really the impetus for all this discussion on sexual harassment is, in fact, survivors who have come out and made the story public in the media, made the story public on their own social media platform. And really, the point is that, look, this is happening and we're not going to wait any longer. We want a solution now. We want justice for ourselves, justice for everyone else. So the difference is people are organized, people are fed up, and they want change.
Exactly. And also at this very pivotal moment in time for Malaysians themselves, there is a lot of political will going behind the sexual harassment bill. In particular, of course, not just the Ministry of Women that Dr. Wan Azizah heads, deputied by Hannah Yeoh, but Dr. Wan Azizah is also the Deputy Prime Minister of the country. EMELLIA, your perspective on how this is possibly the most opportune time we've had ever in Malaysian history to legislate this, not just for women though, but also so that we have safer workplaces in particular.
Absolutely. So we're not just talking about political will in a sense that our politicians are talking about these issues, because if you look at the manifesto in the recent general election, both coalitions talk about the need to have a sexual harassment bill. So in terms of political will, in the political scene, there's definitely a lot of topics and people talking about it. But in the corporate sector too, because I think the realization that sexual harassment could heavily impact an organization, because we've seen a lot of organizations face big troubles because they fail to address certain issues. And on top of that, when we're looking at certain costs, so we always talk about compliance costs and the business case for corporations, and these arguments have become a lot more persuasive these days, especially in light of the recent numbers we heard about. It costs about 15 billion ringgit a year if we fail to address things that may contribute to mental health issues, for example. So I think all around there's definitely more political will, and on top of that, the business case are also getting more persuasive. So hopefully it will create a bigger momentum towards pushing the bill this coming March.
That's right. So the bill is set to be tabled in this March. Now, meanwhile, AWAM has also been carrying out its own on-the-ground research. A survey has been launched recently. Tell us about the whole context of that, LILIAN.
Okay, so recently AWAM has launched a survey with a collaboration with UNICEF.
Right.
And this survey is to look at the prevalence of sexual harassment with the greater public. So at the moment, as we know that sexual harassment laws only apply to employers. However, we want to know how it affects the greater public. So this survey is out for everyone, students, non-working adults, teenagers who are in school, in universities, or not in schools, so we can measure what the people's knowledge on sexual harassment and their what they know about how to look for redress.
That's right, and what they understand about
and
their
what they
rights
understand.
and framing.
Yes, correct. So with this kind of information, so we can see that based on what the public knows and understand about sexual harassment, we can somehow encourage everybody to support the bill, because there are certain aspects and key points in the bill that will support the public. And it's this bill is supposed to give supposed to give free access, not free access, affordable access and easily available access to justice for sexual harassment.
That's right. Now, I also wanted to point out about this AWAM survey, because I did happen to take a few minutes and take it, and it was very inclusionary, particularly because it was also offered in all the major languages.
Yes.
So moving out from there, now each one of your organizations, AWAM, WAO, Young, YWMC, you have all been working in your individual capacities to support for the drafting of the sexual harassment bill. Can you tell us a little bit about WAO's involvement insofar, Renching?
I think really this is a coming together of so many factors and so many people and organizations just coming together to make this happen, really. So, I mean, obviously women's groups have been sort of pushing this for many years. As Amelia was saying, political parties have nominally come on board by including sexual harassment as part of their manifestos. So things are happening now. And it's because of the voices of survivors that really pushed for it to happen at this particular moment. So in terms of the actual drafting of the bill itself, we see, of course, the NGOs are involved. We provided certain inputs that we think are the key elements of a bill that must be there. But I think we also need to recognize, of course, the leadership of the Deputy Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Dr. Wan Azizah, as well as the Deputy Minister of Women, Family, Community Development, YB Hanayo, who's really taken strong leadership position and really see it as a matter of urgency. So I think we have to recognize that. And I think the other party that we really need to recognize is, a lot of people think about, the civil service as being slow or not cooperative or so on. But I think the experience that we've had, that WO has had working in this process is that, of course, there are disagreements and difference of opinion, but really the core group of policy officers, of legal officers in the Ministry of Women, in the Attorney General's chambers, are really going above and beyond, I think, what you would expect a civil servant to do. They're working so hard, many hours, and I think it's quite a stressful task as well. So we need to recognize, I think,
especially with the type of deadline it has, being tabled in the next sitting of Parliament.
So the role of NGOs, the role of the public, the role of politicians, the role of civil service, we see all these people coming together to really make this happen. I think we have to, that's something that's really beautiful, and we need to recognize that.
Absolutely. So on this note, though, we'll go into a quick commercial break. Do stay tuned for the rest of the show.
Harimau Malaya ni haiwan yang gagah berani, tadi didapati di dalam hutan belantara dan sinonim dengan panggilan Raja Rimba. Pada tahun 1950-an didapati lebih 3,000 ekor harimau, tetapi amat sedih sekali sekarang ni didapati cuma kurang pada 200 ekor saja. Harimau Malaya diburu untuk memenuhi pasaran gelap. Pemburu haram menggunakan jerat dan akibatnya harimau kita menderita. Semua rakyat Malaysia perlu berganding bahu untuk menyelamatkan harimau Malaya.
Right, so from there, let's move on into a more definite definition of sexual harassment? I think there is a vague understanding in general amongst the Malaysian public. But when you speak about sexual harassment, which is something that you can actually legislate over, what would that entail, Amelia?
So obviously there's a lot of different forms of sexual harassment. It can happen anywhere and in a lot of different contexts and spaces. But when you look at the definition of sexual harassment, you're really looking at three main elements. The first one, you're looking at a conduct that is unwelcome or unwanted. The second element, we're looking at something that obviously has a sexual element, well, because otherwise it wouldn't be called sexual harassment.
Of course,
and
that's
the third one, we're looking at something which has a negative impact to the victim. And when we talk about negative impact, we're looking at two things. We are either looking at the way it impacts the victim's dignity or sense of worth, for example, and we could also look at the way it affects the environment surrounding the victim. Would the victim feel intimidated? Would the victim feel like she or he is in a hostile environment? Would the victim feel like he or she can't do the work that they are supposed to do in a way that is effective? So if all these elements are present, that could be called sexual harassment.
Yeah,
right.
I think we can give some examples as well to if a lot of times people cannot call these definitions, but if they see something, it's like they know that's wrong. And so you can think of a college student who repeatedly gets inappropriate messages from the lecturer. That would constitute sexual harassment. You could think of a colleague who repeatedly gets subjected to sexual jokes or sexual comments from a colleague or a superior. That would be a clear example of sexual harassment. You could think of someone walking down the street and repeatedly getting catcalled or shouted at. That would also be a form of sexual harassment. And you can see in each of those examples, the three elements that was mentioned by Em and Lilian are all there. It's unwanted, it's sexual, and it can have some negative impact on the person on the receiving end.
That's right. Now, there's also going to be a wider scope of the proposed sexual harassment bill as well, so that it doesn't only cover women, for example, being harassed by men. Can you tell us a little bit about this proposed wider scope?
Okay, so the myth is sexual harassment mainly happens to women, or sometimes some people will only think it only happens to women, but actually sexual harassment happens to men as well. I think YB Hannah had a press statement before where she said that 5% of the sexual harassment complaints in the workplace are from men.
That's right.
So AWAM itself, we recently gathered our Telenita report, and we had about 55 victims of sexual harassment, and 3 of them are men.
That's right.
So
they definitely constitute the numbers.
Yes.
It may not be a majority, but
yes,
they definitely represent.
they have a representation, and this bill is aimed to cover all of that, women and men as well, who are experiencing the harassment in the workplace and outside the workplace.
Right.
Yes.
Now, when it comes, though, to the need for a standalone sexual harassment bill, why is this important? What is inadequate, basically, within the existing legal, civil, and criminal procedures?
So when we look at the reasons as to why a standalone bill is so important, it goes to so many reasons. Because, first of all, when we look at the way the current legal structures work, for example, the definition of sexual harassment in itself is not clear. So yes, there are certain provisions in the penal code that could be seen as a form of sexual harassment. So for example, a breach of modesty, and we have a couple of others. But to the extent of the coverage is different. And on top of that, when we're looking at access for justice, is a very important issue, because criminal structures and civil structures are, number one, something that takes a lot of time, number one. But when we also look at things like burden of proof and sensitization of that process in itself, so do we apply the same standards for criminal, for example, when certain things may not necessarily be best dealt with in a criminal sense? So the standalone bill is supposed to provide an option for survivors to be able to choose which avenue of justice would be best for a particular situation. So we're not saying that criminal avenues are not okay. We're not saying that civil avenues are not okay. We're saying that they're supposed to complement each other, because when they coexist, it means that when you provide these options to the survivors, when they get to pick and choose which avenues is best for them, that means they get to decide what form of catharsis do I get, what form of justice am I really looking for. Do I want to get a civil type of remedy, or do I want to get a criminal sense of justice in my particular case? So I think those things are very important to be provided to a victim. So the definition is important. The burden of proof that we're talking about is important. The way a proceeding is handled is also important. So that is why a standalone sexual harassment bill is supposed to address all these multiple issues.
That's right. So everything taken into context, though, one of the biggest issues when you talk about the entire sexual harassment issue is the fact that it's severely underreported. It goes together with the social stigma, the shame, the mentality that surrounds it. How would the proposed sexual harassment bill, you feel, Ranchung, actually help to perhaps solve this issue?
Okay, so I think imagine a college student who is being harassed by a lecturer, and imagine what kind of avenues. Then we're trying to think of what can she do if she's in that situation. And we've heard a number of these cases, either through our own services, the NGOs, and as well in the media, where students have come out and said, look, this happened to me and I have not been able to get the research that I want. So if this happens to a student, they could try and complain internally within their university or college structures. If there is an internal structure that's good, then that's great. A problem could be solved in that sense. But what we know, there are no standards that universities and colleges must adopt. So it really depends on whether you have a particularly good university or not. If you are in the employment sector, there are certain legislation that applies to the Employment Act, but not for colleges, not for public transport operators, not for voluntary organizations, not for public mall operators. When we know that...
And all of these are scenarios whereby the background could be somewhere sexual harassment occurs.
Yes. In fact, a survey was done in 2019 by YouGov, and they found that 36% of women, Malaysian women, have faced sexual harassment, and about only a fifth of these cases actually happen in the workplace.
Right.
So the
public
other
spaces as well.
Exactly, about a fifth happen in college universities, about a fifth happen in malls, about a fifth happen in public transport, and many other locations. So unless you're for most cases, there is no legislation, there is no framework that would cover you. You might say, okay, I could probably sue the person under the tort of sexual harassment, which is true. But if you're a college student, if you're a regular person, can you afford the thousands and thousands of ringgit in legal fees?
Absolutely an issue.
Can you afford to wait the months and months that the case is going to take? You might want to graduate in a few months already. Do you want your case to be made public in the public record and discussed in the media? Probably not. So these are the obstacles that one would face under the current framework. So what would a Sexual Harassment Act do? Number one, it would ensure that all these organizations are covered and have a minimum standard.
A code of ethics per se to abide by.
A sexual harassment policy that complaints mechanism. So nothing super burdenful, but the basic is to have some kind of mechanism so it would apply to any organization. That's number one. Number two, it would create a more accessible mechanism where anyone can go and report their case. So, for example, this student goes to a university and maybe they don't have a policy, or the policy is not so good and it's not operational. This student can actually go to a tribunal, which was announced by the Deputy Prime Minister last month, and get some access to justice in a way that is cheaper or almost free, in a way that is expedient, because that's how tribunals work. They're specific and faster than the traditional courts, and done in a way that's sensitive and private. So it would create that mechanism for anyone. And I think the third thing that a sexual harassment bill would do is actually prevention. By saying in a piece of legislation that this is sexual harassment and it's wrong, and we're not going to accept it, that's a strong message that society is saying that we're agreeing to this, and as a society we do not want this to happen. So let's take any other step to take that we can take, so that it doesn't have to go to that stage of reporting and escalation. We can have awareness we can have trainings, we can do so many other things to ensure that.
But there's
it
nothing as
doesn't even happen
vociferous
in the
as a
first
law
place.
itself. Right. So time for another quick commercial break. We'll be back right after with the last segment. Stay tuned.
Kepelbagaian budaya, agama dan adat masyarakat. Hidup dalam suasana aman dan harmoni. Bagai pelangi mewarnai keindahan alam. Kepelbagaian budaya, identiti negara. Warna-warni budaya dihormati, persamaan diraih. Keamanan dan kemakmuran negara dinikmati.
Sebuah program khusus bagi mengangkat usahawan dan ikon wanita, kehebatan dan kredibiliti mereka dalam pelbagai industri dan aspek seperti kesihatan, kecantikan, kepimpinan, perniagaan dan sebagainya dalam beberapa segmen menarik dalam dan luar negara. Bersama saya, Ana Zulkifli dan saya, Nadia Zaman.
So Lilian, you were saying, in addition to what Ren Chung had just mentioned about everything surrounding the sexual harassment bill, which will most likely reduce the incidence of underreporting.
Correct. Yes. So just to add on to what Ren Chung mentioned just now, right? The bill will also create accountability for all the organisation or any bodies in Malaysia. So in the sense that even, let's say, for example, an employer, let's say they do have a sexual harassment policy.
Right.
However, they do not follow through it. So they don't invest.
So how can they be penalized, for example?
Correct. That's where the Sexual Harassment Act comes in as well. So if a company or a body or an institution, which will include educational institution, is found not following through or not complying to their own policy, to their internal policy during a grievance, then the complainant can take it to the tribunal to further make the organisation liable for not doing that.
So it's all about being accountable.
Correct.
As well.
Accountability is also one of the main things that this bill tends to have.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Ren Chung, you were mentioning that WAO does actually have a hotline whereby which those who have current grievances before the bill comes into place, hopefully by the March tabling, they can actually contact you.
So WAO offers free and confidential services. Our hotline number is 7956-3488. If you don't remember that, it's okay. You can go to our website, wao.org.my, or any of our social media. So if you or anyone you know is facing sexual harassment or any kinds of gender-based violence, feel free to contact us. Our services are free and confidential.
That's right. From there, Emelia, I wanted to ask you about YWMC's role in the digital campaign and the rollouts, which will also be happening closer to the tabling of the bill, which is just a few weeks ahead.
Right, so we are working on a digital campaign together with the rest of the organizations, and the focus of the digital campaign is to get people to start talking about this.
Right.
And the idea is for people to also, for those who want to, can share their experiences in the hopes that we can break some myths and misconceptions surrounding sexual harassment.
What would you say are some of the most corrosive myths, in a nutshell, from the work that and the breadth of the work that you've done? Some of the most corrosive myths regarding sexual harassment in Malaysia.
It only happens to women, that it only happens in the workplace, that sexual harassment has to be something that is overtly sexual and happens so many times for you to be able to do something about it. So those are some kind of the things we want people to realize, that it can happen once, it can happen more than once, but if the elements of sexual harassment are fulfilled, then that's effectively sexual harassment. So we want people to talk about these issues and talk about the bill, and most importantly, we want people to start tagging their MPs and to talk about how important this bill is in terms of protecting themselves and protecting those around them as well. So if you support the bill, talk about it on social media, tag your MP. You can also tag our digital.
There are hashtags as well.
Yes.
Pass the bill, not the blame.
Yes, so it's hashtag pass the bill, not the blame, as well as the media platforms. social media platforms. We have Malaysia Bebas Gangguan Seksual on Facebook. We have Bebas Gangguan on Twitter and at My Bebas Gangguan Seksual on Twitter. So you can just Google those things and the pages will come up. You can tag us, share with us our stories, and it will be a part of a huge effort to show that this is not just a women's issue, but sexual harassment is a nation's issue, and everyone should care about it, everyone should talk about it, and no one should be shunned from feeling shy from talking about these experiences.
Wonderful. Right, so thank you all so much, not only for your time today, but for sharing your experiences as part of the drafting committee that has worked towards this exceedingly important piece of legislation for Malaysia. So on that note, there you have it. Today's discussion was focusing on the drafting of the Sexual Harassment Bill for Malaysia, which will likely be tabled in Malaysian Parliament at the next session come March. I'm Tamina Kazji here on The Nation, joined by representatives from AWAM, WAO, as well as Young Women Making Change. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find out more about the legislation of the Sexual Harassment Bill on all the associated and affiliated websites. We'll see you again next round.
Setiap malam, saya menembual pemimpin-pemimpin anda.
Kita kena bayar 2.7 bilion tahun depan.
Pelan Pembangunan Kuala Lumpur 2040.
Saya mengangkat perkara-perkara yang menjadi keraguan anda.
Kerajaan memberi subsidi 30 sen 1 liter.
Okey, yang penting bagi saya ialah semangat itu.
Tuh, saya bertanya soalan-soalan yang berlega di fikiran anda.
Kita tahu bahawa editor, wartawan kita ada etika.
Dapatkan jawapan kepada isu-isu kita semua di Ruang Bicara, Isnin hingga Jumaat, 9:30 malam.
Virus COVID-19 adalah spesies baharu dalam famili coronavirus yang menyebabkan pelbagai penyakit dan selsema. Tanda awal virus COVID-19 adalah demam yang berpanjangan dalam tempoh 14 hari, batuk berterusan dan kesukaran bernafas. Jika terdapat tanda-tanda awal, jangan panik. Amalkan langkah awal dari terkena jangkitan. Kerap membasuh tangan. Jangan sentuh mulut, hidung dan mata ketika tangan kotor. Elak berdekatan dengan pesakit. Hindari ke tempat awam ketika tidak sihat. Tutup mulut dan hidung ketika bersin. Anda juga dinasihatkan tidak mudah mempercayai berita yang tidak sahih. Elakkan berita palsu. Dapatkan info di portal sebenarnya.my. Tak pasti, jangan kongsi.